I dig it.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So we're recording, and hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Eternal Void, but with Jazz Podcast. I am your co-host, Michelle, coming at you from sunny and shiny City of Dreams, Detroit, Michigan. And we've got our other co-host,
Gabby. Hi, everybody.
Yo. All right, Gabby, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I wish it was nice and sunny over here, but it's a little cloudy, a little rainy, but still enjoying it.
All right, we'll send some sunshine your way. Who else are we talking to today, Gabby?
Today, we're joined by Walker Jaroch. Walker Jaroch is a writer and editor from Madison, Wisconsin. After spending close to a decade in various journalism and communication roles, they started Driftless Times Media in 2024 as a passion project to explore their lifelong interest in folklore, odd history, and the paranormal. Walker writes about strange cases from their home state of Wisconsin and pens speculative essays, often examining how these odd events and stories influence people and culture. Hi, Walker. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you both for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We're super excited for today's conversation. I feel like we're going to cover a lot of really fascinating topics and a lot of ground overall.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it.
Sweet. Yeah, let's jump right into it. So would you like to tell us like a little bit about, your journey with Driftless Times Media, like kind of how you made that transition from journalism to writing your own stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So the transition part was kind of funny because it started with getting laid off. I was the editor of an aviation trade publication, Aircraft Maintenance Technology. I'd been with the group as a whole for about 5 years, lead editor for about 2.5. And then just, the publishing industry isn't in great straits right now. So they did a reorg, a downsizing. I got let go, and I wanted to keep my skills kind of sharp, writing, editing, researching. And I've been into, the paranormal, folklore, odd history, pretty much all my life, as long as I can remember. So I just saw this as a great way to keep those skills sharp while kind of exploring these topics that I've always kind of passively enjoyed. And now I could actively engage with and write about and think about and kind of get involved with the community in that way. So yeah, it was born out of a layoff, which isn't great, but it's been a lot of fun since. I've been I've been enjoying doing it. And yeah, it turned out to be a good thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you were kind of able to turn that around and kind of transmute that experience into something, positive and something that you really wanted to do. I didn't have this question written down, but have you ever had these kind of experiences of high strangeness yourself? Is that what kind of started your fascination with high strangeness, or was it something else in particular?
That's a really good question. I've definitely had my own strange experiences over the course of my life. Nothing too out there. I've never seen a full body apparition. I've seen a handful of UFOs in the most classic sense of there's something in the sky me and the other people can't identify. And maybe it's doing something weird, or maybe it just looks a little odd. But if that was the impetus for my interest, I'm not sure. I almost want to say yes, just because some of my earliest memories are just weird dream experiences.
Ooh.
But yeah.
I know dreams are super personal, but I'd love to hear some details about the weird dream experiences as your earliest memories. Only because my earliest memories as well were weird dream experiences.
Yeah, and mine were a weird kind of loop almost, just kind of the same dream. I'm not sure how many times it happened. I'm not even 100% sure the age, but it was always kind of start the same way in this kind of desolate sort of ruined cityscape kind of thing. If you're familiar with Eraserhead, that machine sound David Lynch will put in the background throughout, the burp, 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 that sort of soundscape was a part of it. And this would just happen, like I said, probably like 5 or 6 times. And the weirdest part of it was not even so much like the dream, but like afterwards, there'd be like a lingering over effect where like I would be awake as a kid, but like this dream imagery would like still be like kind of superimposed on reality, kind of in a way. Kind of closest I've looked into it a little bit. The closest I've ever found is like Alice in Wonderland syndrome. But that's not like what it was. But that's kind of the closest I could find to like the scientific explanation. But yeah, it was just very odd dreams or night terrors, whatever you want to call them. So like I was saying, I think maybe that's what sparked the interest as a kid, but I really can't be certain. They're so intertwined. Like as far back as I can remember, I've been into these topics.
Very cool. Similar story here. I had like the same dream as like my earliest memory in life. I remember telling my grandma about it. And what I remember from that is telling her was every night for 3 months. And I remember the dream very vividly, and I won't go into it here, but as I've grown older and explored more and more of this, the dream has made a lot more sense in ways that I would never expect it to. And your story, Walker, about like the dream imagery kind of being superimposed over reality when you woke up reminded me of that blue sky skeet you showed me one time, Gabrielle, or Gabby, when it was like a parent asking their young child in the back seat if they had had any weird dreams last night. And the kid says yes. And the parent's like, do you want to tell me about it? And the kid's like, I'm having one right now. You know? So like, maybe that's just something younger brains can do. I don't know. But, as long as like, yeah, that's super cool. And I can definitely see how that would lead into wanting to know more about like high strangeness and weirdness. And do you think that any of that had any impetus with your decision to become a journalist, or do you think that's kind of a separate thing going on?
There's probably definitely like some kind of intertwining there. Writing and storytelling have something I've always enjoyed. So just kind of winding up in the journalism realm. I actually got really lucky. I graduated with just like a plain old English degree, and the local newspaper kind of took a flyer on me, and that's how I got my start in journalism.
Cool.
But yeah, the writing, the storytelling, it's all, again, something I've done since I was a kid. My mom's a librarian, so she encouraged all that. And, I'd say I was interested in a topic, and she'd come home with, bags full of books about it the next day. So reading, writing, that was a core part of my existence from a young age, definitely.
Oh, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Like, I think later on we're going to want to talk a little bit about, some of your creative writing as well, because I know you post like the microfiction on Blue Sky, and that's really cool. In the intersections of, art and high strangeness and all of that. But before we get into that, Michelle, is there a question you wanted to ask first?
No, go right ahead. We can jump right into the questions and then just kind of see where the I'm pulling up my questions now. See where the conversation goes and just roll with it.
Sweet. Yeah. So, Walker, in your pre-show questionnaire, you mentioned that, lately your focus has been on like the ways in which people kind of integrate their experiences of high strangeness in their own lives. And this idea even pops up a little bit in your most recent article, An Uncertain Point About the Unknown. Could you tell us like a little bit more about the inspiration behind this article and how you think that experiencers can find a better sense of balance between, say, skepticism and like fervent conviction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's something that has been, I would say, kind of central to the stuff I do with Driftless Times is probably comes from that like folklore angle of it. It's just how these stories kind of impact our culture and ourselves. But the idea of like integrating these kind of weird experiences into your life, I think I get from like the psychedelic side of things. I knew a guy in college, and he introduced me to like Terrence McKenna and that side of things. So that's been an interest, and I've had my own psychedelic experiences. But just that idea of you have kind of this outside of the box thing happen to you, and with like psychedelics, like you're willingly going to have it happen to you. You're taking the drug or whatnot, so it's going to happen, and then you need to integrate it. But I see a parallel there with like these paranormal experiences too. Like sometimes, people can get them to happen if they want, or claim they can get them to happen, like CE5, things like that. But for like the most part, people aren't, expecting to see a UFO, or they don't think they're moving into a haunted house. And then they have these very out of the box things happen to them that, in the essay you just referenced that I put out the other day, for like someone that doesn't believe in a ghost or a UFO, you see this thing and it is really kind of like reality bending. I mean, to the extreme, like reality shattering. Like talking to some of my skeptic friends, like they wouldn't know what to do if that happened to them. Like when I get them to suspend their like belief, like, well, if you saw like the Bigfoot cross the road, like how would that impact your life? And like they don't know, and like I don't think anybody can really know. Like even myself into these topics, I'll pose that question to myself, like get up and go to the restroom late at night. And like, what if I came back and there was just something outside of like, my realm of belief? And I believe a lot of this stuff, like I'm into it. But even if I walked to the bathroom and there was a ghost there or like a gray alien, like what would that do to me? What would that do to my sense of like reality? And I think we see like a lot of not so great things with that, like the history of like people forming cults or kind of using it in negative ways. But I see it again, kind of with my personal experiences. Like you can take that the other direction too, where it's like my reality just got totally bended and upended. And now like to like in a nutshell, like anything's possible, including like the good things, including making a better world. We can get out of this, hyper normalization is a big term thrown around a lot these days, but like this way of thinking that like you just kind of entrenched in all the time, which kind of goes back to the psychedelic idea of like, they'll say taking acid or like mushrooms can help with depression because it literally rewires your brain to think in a different way. And these events can kind of do the same thing in a way, not on that biochemical level, but just in that reality shattering, like, oh, if ghosts are real, and I didn't believe in ghosts before, like what else could be real for me personally and like the world at large?
I'm so on board with this, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of our talk with Joshua Cutchin about breaking the fourth wall in narrative fiction, and like when it's happened to like in real life as well. And like, for some people who are like more skeptical, having one of these experiences could be quite traumatizing. And that's like talking with Joshua about how quite often it's a traumatizing experience that causes one to like kind of break the spiritual fourth wall. In some cases, and then there's also, like you were saying, with psychedelic experiences and stuff like that. But that's, just 100%. That's super cool. So I want to ask about these experiences and like stuff that like you're interested in and what you've been tracking. Can you tell us about Alan Utke, Wisconsin's first ufologist?
Yeah. And that actually segues kind of nicely into what I was just talking about, because that's like a big back end of his philosophy. So he started out as a ufologist in Wisconsin, and he was active. Let's see, I made a note here to get my dates right. From 1965 to 1971, he claimed he was the only ufologist in Wisconsin at the time. His interest in it started just kind of as, I don't know if a lark is the right word, but he kind of gave one talk on it, and then he was surprised to find how many people were also interested in it, and that kind of drove his research into it. He was concentrated mostly on the Elmwood kind of Wisconsin area, but at the time Elmwood wasn't what it is today. You know, it's one of the quote unquote kind of UFO capitals of the world. Definitely like the UFO capital of Wisconsin. But he was investigating it about 10 years before it got put on the map for the stuff that happened there in the 70s. But yeah, he was a really interesting guy. He actually did a lot of work, Michelle, in Michigan. He actually predicted when and where a UFO would show up in Michigan, and he was pretty right about it. He was like a little bit outside of the time frame and the location, but otherwise his prediction was correct.
Where did he say it was going to be, and where did it show up?
He didn't disclose where it was going to be. He was a little secretive that way, but he was trying to get like a team of people together to go verify himself, and he couldn't do it. But he had a friend in the area who verified it for him.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But his idea was that it had to do with like copper and mineral deposits in the region.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, Michigan's definitely got a lot of that.
Yeah. And he was a chemist by trade, so he brought a lot of the science over to what he did. But after he kind of got discouraged with ufology after a while, he was actually the first director of MUFON, and then did that for a year, and then just kind of dropped out of ufology. Just got burnt out on it. He was trying to secure funding. He didn't like kind of the ridicule that came with it. And he kept an interest in it. I actually had the pleasure of speaking with him over the phone when I was working on these stories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really cool. I wrote him a letter. I was like, hey, I want to talk to you. Like, if you're willing to, here's my phone number. He called me up. But he's a really private guy. Asked me not to use anything that we discussed in the phone conversation in the article. So I'm just trying to think, like, what did I actually talk to him about, and what did I put in the article to respect his privacy? But
right.
Yeah, essentially just got kind of burnt out on the field and shifted his focus then into these really interesting kind of scientific and philosophical writings. Really concerned with things like the environment. He was concerned with the way like biology was going. He put out a book called Biobabble, which was all about like how science could kind of go wrong with things like cloning and like genetic engineering, which was really the crux of his kind of then philosophical work. He has this whole idea around balancing science and like the mystical, for a better term, because he was a very religious man himself. He was a Lutheran. So he's always kind of struggling with like his religious spiritual side and his like materialist science side. And he, back to kind of what I was saying before, his big kind of philosophical idea, which like has informed a lot of like my ways of looking at this stuff since learning about it, was balancing what he called ultimate reality and meaning, which is kind of like the human spiritual longing, with immediate reality and meaning, which is like the more scientific, manipulate the world so we can, you know, advance our species, you know, modern medicine, things like that. And his big issue with science was that it had completely rejected like the spiritual, that we were totally out of alignment. He has this quote that's like, the cold, uncaring, amoral scientific method has just led to like hedonism and like the destruction of the climate. Like there's no concern there. But he was also very critical of like, you can't go too far into the spiritual direction either, because again, like science does a lot of good, modern medicine, so on. But there is a balance. And like his idea was that if humanity can find that balance, we'll be able to advance holistically, rather than, like he said, this like cold nihilistic science and this too far spiritual side that, you know, doesn't get us penicillin. So that's the kind of back to what I was saying before, like integrating these weird experiences into your life in like a healthy way was really kind of how he took his whole kind of back half of his career with that philosophy.
Yeah, that really is fascinating. I feel like it lines up really well with sort of, you know, other kind of like primary thinkers in like the realm of high strangeness. Like I immediately think about like Robert Anton Wilson and like his whole idea about, we all go through like the chapel perilous is like what he called sort of this, weird out of the norm experiences. And people either come out as like super paranoid and they think like every bump in the night is a ghost or a demon or what have you. Or they come out like as an agnostic where they're like, okay, there's something going on. I don't know what this is, but there's definitely something there. And yeah, finding that balance seems to be a nice way of exploring that without either like totally losing yourself in, like the fantasy of it, and also not completely rejecting it by saying like, oh, it's impossible. Like it's being open-minded without, getting swallowed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And that's where, I get a little frustrated with like my skeptic friends when talking about this stuff, where it's like nobody, or at least I'm not like trying to poo-poo science or like I love science. There was a time in my life when I thought I was going to be like a scientist, and then I learned I was terrible at math.
Same.
Yeah, it's terrible. I don't know my multiplication tables. It's a little embarrassing to admit, but yeah, it's I try and tell them like I'm not nobody. At least in the kind of camps of like the paranormal that I associate with, is like trying to get rid of science or poo-poo it or whatnot. It's just, there seems to be, and this is another kind of yucky idea, is like intuitively there seems to be a way reality operates that like all people kind of get, like to a certain degree, like even exercising like little superstitions. Like I wear the same pair of pants every Sunday so my football team wins. And
I make the same pasta before every podcast.
See, there you go. And there's something to it that, again, it's like intuitive, and kind of the driving force behind, again, his philosophy is like, we all get that like material reality seems to operate in one way, and then there's something else under the surface that's kind of operates in a little different way. And again, finding that balance. And again, the skeptic friends, it's very hard for them, at least my skeptic friends, to get their kind of head wrapped around that. And it's like, but I guarantee there's something in your life you do that like you're doing it because of that intuitive level. You're making the same pasta before every podcast because like, there's some sort of, for lack of a better term, like magic there that's doing something that you can't explain, but intuitively, it does something.
Yeah. Right. And like, for me, it just reminds me of like my friends. Cause I just happened to do a podcast, somebody else's podcast, and they had pasta that before the recording. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to make this my thing. And it's just going to be like celebration of friendship and community. And, and just kind of also like, it's like almost a minor initiatory experience where you're like, or like veil experience where you're changing modes, right? Like, you're about to go do something, and this is the preparatory steps in order to go do this, right? So it's almost like, it's pasta, but it's also like opening a door, right?
No. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's some of like the best ways to exercise kind of that sort of magic, if you will, is like that rooted in like that personal connection. Growing up, you probably heard like you see like 11, 11, 12, 12, like you make a wish. And that was a big thing growing up, like my middle school and things. And I just kind of carried over for fun myself into adulthood. And then I learned my mom does it with like any repeating number. And I kind of written that off. It's like, well, there's got to be like some rules to like, the repeating number magic, and these are going to be mine. But then I learned, well, if it's good enough for mom that all the repeating numbers are magic, well, then it's good enough for me too. So now, every time I see 222444, not only do I do my little, middle school magic ritual that I've carried over, but I'm also then reminded my mom, my family, and that just feels good in its own right. So yeah, there's something to having these little rituals and traditions born out of a more personal place like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So there was something perhaps intuitively, I don't even know how far we can go with this. But I want to ask you, what do you know about Wisconsin time slips? Do you have any like stories offhand? I know you wrote in your Nature of Oz article, there was some time slips mentioned, but I'd like to know more.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot. And the weird thing is that I know people who have had it happen to them, though. I've never had it happen personally, and I don't know. There's like a handful of places in Wisconsin where, like, if you sit on this gravestone, you'll get pushed off. You know, your car goes backwards. But every once in a while, I know someone who got essentially, like, for lack of a better term, like fairy led while trying to drive up to visit a dying relative. And they had driven this, path countless times. They could do it in their sleep. And in this one instance, they just were like going around in circles, and they're like, I don't know why I can't find this place. And yeah, like they didn't put it in like the fairy led terms, but to me, it was like, that sounds like, being fairy led. And it happens every once in a while. I'll get a story like that from someone where it's just like, I don't know how I missed the exit. I don't know how we wound up on these roads. So it's something I need to look into more about the area around here. But it definitely does happen to people.
Interesting. So you think it's tied to the geology then?
I wouldn't be surprised. We have a lot of weird geological features in Wisconsin. I mean, we have the Driftless region, which is like an enigma and a mystery in its own right, that nobody knows for certain why the glaciers kind of like missed that one part of the country. We have a weird, I think it's called like the tertiary zone, where essentially the northern half of Wisconsin's biome is different, radically different from the southern half of the biome, and they meet in the middle in this tertiary zone. So like the flora and fauna up north are totally different than what you'll find where I am in Madison. So that like bisects the state in half, and then we have the Driftless region that kind of bisects it another way. So there's a lot of like different like boundary zones and like liminal areas, if you will, kind of built into the feature, like the natural features of Wisconsin.
Okay, I'm looking at a map of Wisconsin now, and something kind of weird I'm noticing is y'all have an Ashland town right at the like northern tip of Wisconsin, right near the Michigan UP, right next to an ironwood town. And I was just on a road trip not too long ago where I noticed there was an Ironton right next to an Ashland in Kentucky. So that is interesting. But I'd like to know about the Driftless region. That is such a cool name. Like, I don't know. It reminds me of like a neat band or a cool TV show or something. So what's going on with Driftless in Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's kind of the state's defining feature. It is where the glaciers didn't hit the state. So it's in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and just an itty bitty tiny part of Illinois. And it gets its name from there aren't any drifts there, which is what the glaciers left behind when they came through and like smashed everything flat. So you'll be driving about like 15 minutes out of Madison where I am here. And then the terrain goes from kind of like flat farmland to these like rolling hills and bluffs and valleys. And it's really cool. Like it reminds me of like the Appalachian Mountains or something. And that's what it gets compared to a lot. But it's like totally driving or walking into a different world. It's very unique. And like I said before, nobody knows why the glaciers just kind of went like bleh around the region. But they did. And it's a really unique place. Yeah. If you ever come visit Wisconsin, you have to go check out the Driftless region. I mean, just driving through it is beautiful.
I am so down. I'm just looking at the pictures on Wikipedia right now, and it looks beautiful. Mm-hmm. This is amazing. Oh, very cool.
So since we're talking about, Wisconsin and kind of like the weirdness of Wisconsin, I would love to ask about, I believe his name is Bozo the sea serpent. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's pronounced Bozu, I believe.
Bozu, okay.
I had to do it a bunch of times to get it right, because in my head I always want to pronounce it Bozo, like the clown, but no. Yeah, Bozu is our resident sea serpent here in Madison is said to have resided in Lake Mendota. It's kind of funny. You're talking about the Bridgewater Triangle. And like, if you want to consider that like a window area, Lake Mendota, I think you could contend is probably a window area too, because we have Bozu, but there's also a bunch of like UFO sightings around the lake. There's a whole bunch of indigenous lore from around Lake Mendota. That's actually where Bozu gets his name from. It's a shortened Ojibwe term down to Bozu. But there's even like a Sasquatch sighting along Lake Mendota shores. Really interesting place. But no, Bozu started out as possibly a fisherman's tall tale from 1883. We had a local fisherman named Billy Dunn, who was like regarded in the local papers. Let's put it that way. They'd always be publishing the fish he caught from around the area. He took the president fishing out on the lake. He claimed to have a pet fish that he would use to tow his boat. So definitely one for tall tales. But back in June, was it June 22nd, 1883, he claimed to have fought a snake in Lake Mendota that kind of charged his boat. This like massive snake bit through his oar as he was fighting it off, left the fangs stuck in the oar. So the story goes, and that kicked off a sea serpent flap in Lake Mendota. More and more people started claiming to see this monster. Scared fishermen, tipped over boats. It would be seen like eating out of the sewage drain leading into the lake. And then in 1942, it got its name Bozu. And it's a little interesting because if you track the story, it kind of goes from like fisherman tall tale to like actual like sea serpent sightings. And then about the end of the 1800s, there's kind of like a lull, like nobody sees this monster anymore. And then it pops back up in 1942. Now it's like a folklore character, Bozu. And it's kind of like a trickster character. Actually, it's the Ojibwe trickster god Nanabozu, where it gets its name from. So Nanabozu, shortened down just to Bozu. But yeah, it would cause water spouts in the lake. It would chase after your boats. Its most famous story is that there are a couple of kids, college kids, sunbathing, and it popped up to tickle the girl's foot. She thought it was her boyfriend. I was like, "Hey, knock it off!" And he's like, "I'm not doing anything." And they turn around, and there's this like grinning sea serpent licking her toes. So he's a weird like trickster-y character. Hasn't been seen in a long time. The story goes it left Lake Mendota via the Yahara River to parts unknown. But I like to think that maybe he's still out there somewhere.
That is fascinating. And I love like the resurgence of that kind of like trickster energy. Like we've talked about tricksters quite a bit on the podcast. And I definitely have a soft spot for trickster, archetypes. So that's really fascinating. Yeah,
it's interesting. Because like I said, it's Nanabozu's the Ojibwe trickster kind of god or spirit that they shortened down to Bozu for this weird little folklore monster. But just with all the other indigenous lore around the lake, which would actually be like Ho-Chunk, which is like part of like just like kind of trickster weird energy on top of weird energy, is like they didn't use like a Ho-Chunk term for this monster in the Ho-Chunk region. They used an Ojibwe term, and they're more northern Wisconsin, Canada. But around the lake is all this other indigenous lore, which where it starts getting weird is like there was tales of some water spirits that lived in the lake, and they were the same color and had like these really long tails as the snake that Billy Dunn was supposed to have fought, like both spotted. And like I said before, just kind of like if you believe in the idea like a window area, I think you can make the argument that Mendota is definitely one of them. I mean, even just with that, like the weird convolutedness that sometimes happens with like these paranormal and folklore things. Like it's so intertwined over there with Mendota and all the different indigenous folklore, modern folklore, sea serpent sighting, UFO sighting, Sasquatch. It's just like overlapping to the point you're like, there's got to be something going on here.
Absolutely. And I firmly believe that most bodies of water are a window area of some sort in some degree. Recently spent like the last 4 to 5, 6 months buried in like a video game series. It's like built around that presupposition as well. So I totally am 100% with you. If I can, I wanted to change the direction a little bit. And I wanted to ask about your article, Comrades from Mars and the Leftist Instincts Behind Disclosure. I got kind of done with the ufology stuff around like 2017 to 2021. I was just like, you know what? This isn't what I want to do with my life. But at the same time, I got a lot more lefty. So I would love to know. I didn't have a time to read the article. I just saw the title. So could you give us a little rundown on what's going on there?
Yeah, for sure. Like you, I love the UFO. I hate the UAP. Yeah. Like UFO is like probably my like paranormal, home, so to speak. It's what I gravitate to the most. But the UAP stuff just doesn't do it for me. So this was sort of my like, I don't know if you want to say like attack of the UAP, but I was just noticing like in my research into other areas, the way people were talking about what they were hoping for with like disclosure and like the government and stuff. And it all hinged on this idea of like, it will make society better. And they weren't sure how it would make society better. We'll get like free energy and then we won't have to go to work. And there are like people on Reddit. I think in the article, I have a couple of comments in there quoted of people just like, I can't wait for disclosure day because I don't want to have to go to my job anymore. And it's like, where are they getting this idea that like UFOs are going to land and then they're not going to have to go to their job anymore? And kind of the crux of the article is just tracing the idea of like, what do they call it? Like 0 point energy. And like, because of this, when they announce like disclosure, they'll have to admit that there's 0 point energy, and then we'll give free energy. And it's hard to explain because it's almost like that South Park, like question mark, question mark, question mark. And then I don't have to go to my job anymore. Yeah. So it goes like disclosure, they admit there's 0 point energy, something. And then I live in a utopian society where I don't have to worry about my bills and like paying to go to the hospital anymore. And the article just kind of looks at where this idea comes from, kind of the people who are peddling it and like preying off of these, for lack of a better term, like these leftist like impulses of like, I want like, affordable healthcare. I want affordable housing. I don't want people, starving in the streets anymore, things like that. And they think that, again, this 0 point energy or whatever disclosure will bring is going to solve these problems. And then you have these people, who make a lot of money off this stuff, like Stephen Greer, Luis Elizondo.
They all seem to be pretty right wing too.
They are very much so. Yeah. The other day, Jack Brewer over on Blue Sky like posted a clip. I was just like, Lou Elizondo on one of those, like I think it was like Newsmax or something, and it's yeah. So there's just like an irony there to me of like, this is like what these people want, and like their hearts are kind of in the right place. They're going about it totally wrong, but you're preying on like their desperation and their want of like something better, and you're enriching yourself at the same time, while then also like supporting these very right wing, at least like right-wing news channels with your appearance and stuff. It's a very interesting kind of dynamic. And I don't know how it's evolved since I kind of put that out, because there's a lot of, new file drops and those like the alien.gov site they launched, which is just like monstrous. So maybe I'll keep my fingers crossed. I haven't checked in on the UAP crowd really since I published that, but I'll keep my fingers crossed that maybe they're coming around to what's actually going on.
Hopefully, yeah. All we can hope for is people wake up to compassion and punch Nazis, right?
100%.
And learning the balance between, like, yeah, it's just that UFO or UApology crowd was a lot to take in, as like the cities were burning and we had like a pandemic, and we still have a pandemic, but yeah, like, yeah, it was. I had to drop something, and it was definitely that for a while. So I would love to see how they're doing in the last few years.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting having like friends that are not totally UAP types, but like they're kind of like paranormal curious, and then like getting into it with like 2017 and that stuff, and it having it sort of like rein them in and be like, well, hold your horses here. If you want to know about UFOs, I can fill you in, but there's a whole lot, muddier water here with the UAP stuff.
Yeah. The path. Yeah. It's like, how do you tell them? It's like, I want to support your curiosity, but the path you're starting down ends in a very swastika-y place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And it's definitely not an accident that, this is all happening while things are so kind of unpredictable. Like, our lives are very unpredictable. And I think people are, desperate for like that sense of security. Like, they want a savior to kind of step in. Like, your article reminds me a lot of like the Marxist critique against religion, where, religion is seen as like, the opiate of the masses. So it's a painkiller. It makes you more willing to accept what's happening in front of you, because you have this hope that, when I die, I get to go to heaven and things will be amazing. Whereas here it's like, okay, there are aliens, they're going to save us. So we only have a few more years. Oh, just till 2027. And, then they'll land and, everything will be fabulous. Like, it's a lot of it's like a way to kind of redirect like that energy that could be spent on making things better, putting that effort into working on a local level and improving people's lives. And instead, you're focused on, essentially like a wish. Like, yes, it'd be wonderful if aliens came down from the sky and, fixed all of our problems. But until that happens, it's all on us. So we should at least be working towards making things better, whether or not they actually show up someday.
Yeah. We should be the alien 100%. We wish to encounter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, rock on. Well, I can dig it. I don't know where to segue from that, so I'm going to pretend to sip my coffee. That last sip. Oh, it's 2:53. Interesting.
Ooh, time and time again.
That was a time that was mentioned in Twin Peaks. I'm not trying to be like, oh, look at the time. I'm just like, yeah. There's so many places in Wisconsin I want to ask about, but really, I think a good place to start would definitely be your website, and I may come back to you on that. Do we want to ask, Cami, about fiction writing?
Yeah. Let's definitely switch to, your microfiction. Like, I'm a writer too. Like, I love learning about the intersections of, art, writing, and high strangeness. So could you tell us like a little bit about like what inspired your microfiction writing, and, whether it's connected to your interest in high strangeness in any way?
Yeah, for sure. I've been writing kind of fiction probably longer than anything else. Like I said before, just like a kind of natural born storyteller. And probably like all English majors, went to college with the hopes of being like the next, great American novelist. So the microfiction is just kind of like a writing challenge I've kind of given myself now that I'm getting a little bit more serious about writing fiction again, and trying to like actually, not just, start a bunch of stories and never finish them, but actually like see things through and like try and get published and things like that. So I was like, I think this will be a fun kind of challenge to see what I can do in the character limits of like Blue Sky. And so far, I haven't gotten totally tapped out yet. I thought I'd be done a lot sooner than I have been. So that's been nice. But where like the fiction kind of intersects with the paranormal stuff, for me, they don't really inform each other too much. If anything, the fiction informs like my views on the paranormal more than like the paranormal informs the fiction. Like a lot of times I look at, you know, stories people have of like the strange and the unusual through a more literary lens and kind of apply that English degree to it and read it like I would, you know, a story or something that I was writing an essay on. Yeah, but fiction writing is so strange in a way because it's like there is something almost paranormal about it because like where do these ideas come from? And a lot of like the microfiction stuff has been just like me laying on my couch, you know, before bed while my partner is watching reels in the other room and I'm snuggling with the cat and I'm listening to like some music and then like, you know, there's a scene or like a character pops in my head and then I'm like, oh, I got to write this down quick and then post it on the blue sky. So it's like, where does that come from? And there's definitely like a Josh Cutchin Fourth Wall Phantoms-esque sort of thing about that. When I was first like reading his book, I was just like nodding along to the whole beginning, like, yep, yeah, I get this. No, I really like fiction writing, and it's been fun to be posting it on Blue Sky and getting more serious into writing short stories again.
That's really cool, and I love like the way that you emphasize that it's incredibly helpful, especially when it comes to things like omens and symbols and, you know, sort of like what does it mean? Like, sure, like a deer might mean one thing to one person, but in a different context, it could mean a completely different thing. And, you know, like in the literary world, you're sort of like taught like how do you define symbols? And usually it's not super strict. Like there can be some malleability to an interpretation. So yeah, like I always like try to encourage people, like if you're into the paranormal, you should definitely be reading fiction and, you know, exploring, unpacking that fiction, because the more you learn how to unpack fiction, you can unpack the narratives in, you know, kind of your own life.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, 100%. I think it's some people get a little taken aback when you do it that way. Mm-hmm. I kind of touch on that in my latest piece we were talking about back at the beginning, where people can kind of get a little like, oh, I just wanted a campfire story. I didn't want you to like read into the symbolism of what I'm telling you actually. And I've had it where people kind of retreat immediately back to kind of like materialism, like, well, there's actually a rational explanation for what I just told you. I thought was a ghost story. Or they just kind of brush it off as like, yeah, maybe, who knows? And I don't know, it might just be the way my brain works and all the classes and stuff I've read on, you know, literary theory and film analysis. But it's probably my favorite thing about like the paranormal, folklore, and all of it is just like the different lenses you can apply to it, literary, film analysis, and like find something new. Because, you know, I love a good campfire story as much as the next person, but I think to your point, Gabby, it's so much more enriching to apply these lenses to it and like look at something symbolically and something that's so rooted in like archetype and stuff like that. I think you're doing kind of a disservice if you don't at least try to tease that out.
Yeah. And could we maybe talk a little bit more about like the different lenses that people can use, and I guess sort of like, yeah, the benefits of using those lenses to look at the paranormal instead of sort of taking it right at face value or immediately dismissing it as like, oh, this can't happen. Oh, this is impossible.
Yeah, for sure. I think the beauty of something that like is anomalous is like by definition is like it doesn't have a definition. It's, you know, outside of the norm. It wasn't supposed to happen. So yeah, you can look at it through, you know, the regular everyday lens. But again, it's by definition, it's like, well, you could look at this however you want. It wasn't supposed to happen. So like my preferred way is like the literary or like the film analysis lens, because that's ripe with like symbolism and very kind of like Jeff Kripal kind of humanities is like a good field of study to kind of look at all this stuff through, just because that's kind of how we're trained in the humanities to look at things, is via archetype, symbol, and this stuff, I think, kind of operates in that same way. But I don't think you have to be, limited to that too. And, I can hear, a skeptic friend in my ear already telling me like, yeah, like you're just mistaking something that has a benign explanation and you're applying, too much thought to it. Like you're reading symbol into something that doesn't like have symbolism to it. And it's like, sure, that's not fun. And like my main objective is like to have fun. So I'm going to do it regardless. But
or what if everything has some level of symbolism?
Exactly. That's my other kind of way of looking at it, is like, even if you have this event happen to you and like, sure, there's 100% like rational way of putting it. If the way you interpreted it, like changed your mind or influenced how you're feeling, like, does it matter what the actual like underlying like root of it was? Like, I think the example I used with like one friend was like, if you had like met somebody and like you thought they were flirting with you and that gave you the courage to like get their phone number, and you go out, you wind up getting married, and years down the line you're like, I'm so glad you flirted with me that night. And they were like, oh, I was never flirting with you. Would that like invalidate, the love you feel because there wasn't actually any meaning there that you read into that interaction? But I don't think so. But I'm sure, again, the skeptic friend in my ear would be like, well, to me it does.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it kind of speaks to like the way that, the reality that we perceive is, very subjective. Like, yes, there could be like an objective, concrete reality out there, but with how our senses work, our minds work, we can't quite grasp that objective reality literally as it is. So like, yeah, our brains are kind of like wired for this kind of meaning making. So like learning how to do that intentionally is, a great way to kind of like balance everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's something that I've started doing more and more, in my life, that it's benefited me. I'll put it that way. And I know the other people, I know who do it also find meaning in it. And I think, as long as you're finding meaning in it and you're not, being self-destructive with it, or you're not going down like a path that harms you in some way, then like, what's the harm?
Right. Yeah. It ties back into what you were saying about, like finding like that balance and yeah, like kind of leading with, like making sure like you're okay, you're grounded, but at the same time being open to the possibility that maybe reality is a little bit weirder than first meets the eye.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
Sweet. So, Michelle, do you have a question you want to ask?
I had a question that was going to circle us back to what we were talking about at the beginning, and then it completely left my brain. So that's just going to have to be something that comes up from, it's going to have to come back and bubble back up through the collective unconscious and get asked at another time, perhaps on another episode. I do apologize for spacing out there. I was kind of just getting lost in like the idea of fiction. No, this has been absolutely wonderful. And I am, Walker, I was not super familiar with like you or your work before prepping for this podcast. And I just like, for what it's worth, I'm really digging what you're putting out there and like kind of injecting into the zeitgeist. I think there's a lot of not potential, a lot of power in like just the transference for action. I think there's a lot of potential here for like a new direction for the scene is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I'm really excited about that. But no, I don't have any other questions I want to ask. We could, Gabby, do you want to transfer over to talking about the charity?
Yeah. So every week we like to select a charity or mutual aid drive and, kind of put it in front of our audience. And Walker, would you like to tell us a little bit about which charity you chose for today?
Yeah, I chose the Badger Prairie Needs Network. They're a organization based out of kind of south central Wisconsin here. Funny enough, I'm like 5 minutes from their headquarters in Verona. No, but they do a lot of good work. They run a food pantry, and that's something kind of near and dear to my heart. It's just kind of supporting your local community out there through the food pantry. You know, there's lots of people out there who you would be surprised, you know, are in need of, you know, food assistance, and kids who aren't getting, you know, the nutrition they need to grow properly. And, you know, so the Badger Prairie Needs Network is my local one, helps my local community, and I donate to them when I can, definitely around the holidays when they're doing their food drives. I always chip in a few $100. But yeah, if you're not in, you know, South Central Wisconsin, I'm sure you have your own, you know, local kind of food pantry support network like that. And I encourage folks to look into it and help those out as they can. And if you're in South Central Wisconsin, you know, the Badger Prairie Needs Network is a great one to support.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, like Walker said, please donate to your local food pantry. You know, working local has the biggest impact. And yeah, the link to the Badger Prairie Needs Network will be in the show notes below.
Yeah, and, you know, don't be afraid to give your local food pantry or Badger Prairie Needs Network. Give them an email or call and ask them, you know, what they need that maybe they're not getting donations of. I know, like, my local food bank pretty much always needs toilet paper and diapers, and they don't really get a whole lot of those donated. So you never know what they need, and it's best check with them, or, you know, money always helps too. All right, cool. Well, I think that's everything. Walker, we really appreciate it. This has been a pleasure and a joy for us, and we hope to have you on again in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. Thank you for having me today, and it's been great talking to you both.
Awesome. Well, this has been another episode of the Eternal Void, but with Jazz podcast. We appreciate everybody involved, listeners, guests, hosts, and just thank you for all the support. If you want to ball up $1 and throw it up the internet to us, we have a Ko-Fi link that'll be in the show notes. You can find us on Blue Sky at saranasvoid.bluesky.social, or however that goes, or send us an email. Our email address is in the show notes as well. We would love to hear from you. Tell us your weird stories. Give us an idea for a show if you've got one. Leave your comments, and let's start a conversation. All right, cool. Thank y'all. Have a great one. Bye.
Bye.